On March 21, 1980, the sound of a shotgun blast bounced through the small streets of South Philadelphia. The man known as the Gentle Don fell forward in his car, and blood made a puddle on the dashboard for 21 years. Angelo Bruno was in charge of the Philadelphia world of criminals by shaking hands instead of using a gun that night. His killing would start a lot of fighting and would cause more than 30 people to die in the years to come. But his story, it starts much earlier in the hot, sunny hills of Sicily with a boy who would change the rules of the American Mafia. Before we get into the story of how one of America's most interesting mob bosses became powerful and then lost it all, I want to know, where are you watching from? What time is it where you live? Put your city in the comments below. And if you're ready to take a trip through the best time for organized crime, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. This is going to be a long one. Get your headphones, get comfortable, and let's go into the world of Angelo Bruno. Now let me take you back to 1910. On May 21, 1910, in the small town of Villalba in Sicily, a boy was born who would one day be in charge of a huge business worth millions. His name was Angelo Annaloro. To understand Angelo Bruno, you have to first understand Sicily in the early 1900s. It was a place where being very poor made life very hard for families, where old rules about being honorable were mixed with trying hard just to stay alive. It was a place where the old world was already falling apart because of new ways of doing things. Villalba is in the middle of Sicily in a region called Caltanissetta. It's not a perfect place by the sea with blue water and houses for visitors. No, Villalba is inside the country, a tough place for farming. The land is brown and dusty in the summer and muddy in the winter. The people who lived there were farmers, shepherds, and workers. Life was hard. There were not many chances to get ahead. And for many families, the idea of America, that faraway golden land across the ocean, became something they thought about all the time. The Annaloro family was just like them. Angelo's father looked at his new baby son and saw the same future that had trapped his family for years and years. Before him, there was very hard farm work, being poor, and a never-ending struggle. The stories coming back from America told a different story. Streets were paved with gold, they said. There were jobs for everyone. It was a chance to build something, to become someone. Between 1900 and 1920, more than 4 million Italians moved to the United States. They came through Ellis Island, holding on to old, beaten-up suitcases and faded pictures. They spoke no English, and they brought nothing but hope and a strong will to succeed. The Annaloro family joined this big group of people. We don't know the exact year because the records from that time are not very good, but sometime when Angelo was a child, they made the trip. Picture it, a young boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing on the deck of a crowded boat. The warm Mediterranean sun was replaced by Atlantic storms. They were on the sea for weeks, feeling sick, scared, and excited, and then finally, they saw the Statue of Liberty coming out of the fog in the harbor. Lady Liberty was promising freedom and a chance to the tired, the poor, the crowds of people wanting to be free. The real life for people who moved to America was very different from the Golden Dream. The Annaloro family, like thousands of others, moved to South Philadelphia. This was not the America you see in Hollywood movies or on postcards for tourists. South Philadelphia in the 1910s was a crowded neighborhood full of people from other countries. Mostly Italian, it was a place where old country ways mixed in a not-so-easy way with new country dreams. Angelo's father did what many fathers from other countries did. He worked. He saved up just enough money to open a small grocery store at 4341 North 6th Street in Feltonville. This was a neighborhood in the north part of Philadelphia. Imagine a small store with a faded cover over the front. Wooden boxes of vegetables were piled up outside. The smell of dried sausage and old cheese was everywhere. Inside, shelves were full of food from Italy, like olive oil, pasta, and canned tomatoes. These were things that made the neighborhood feel a little more like home. Starting at age 12, young Angelo worked in his father's store. Not just after school, and not just on weekends, but every day. He would wake up before the sun came up to get deliveries. Stack boxes and sweep floors. He would work at the counter, learning how to talk to customers and how to deal with the people who sold them things. He learned how to count money. School was not as important, and education was something the family could not pay for. By the time Angelo got to high school, South Philadelphia High School, a huge brick building that is still there today, he was already more of a business person than a student. The records show that he dropped out. There was no graduation and no diploma for a boy like Angelo. The classroom did not offer anything that the streets could not teach him better and faster. At an age when most teenagers were thinking about dances and baseball games, Angelo Annaloro was opening his own grocery store. It was located at 8th and Annan Streets in the Passyunk Square neighborhood. He was back in South Philadelphia, back with the people who spoke his language, understood his ways, and respected hard work. The store was a real business, completely legal with all the right papers. Angelo sold vegetables, he sold canned foods, bread, and cheese. He served the people in the neighborhood. He let customers he trusted pay later. He closed on Sundays to go to church to everyone who looked. He seemed like just another hard-working Italian immigrant trying to make a life in America. But how things look, as we'll find out in this story, can fool you. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution started. The making, selling, and moving of alcoholic drinks was now against the law in the whole country. Congress and the people who supported this law believed it would make America a better, more hardworking country. Instead, they created the biggest chance for criminals in the country's history. Prohibition, the Great Experiment, as people called it, was a complete failure for the police, but it was like a gold rush for groups of criminals all of a sudden. A product that millions of Americans wanted was now against the law. And when people want something and there's no legal way to get it, criminals step in to provide it in cities all over America. Groups of criminals grew very big and powerful. Chicago had Al Capone. New York had Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky. And Philadelphia had its own group of people who secretly made and sold alcohol and ran secret bars. Angelo Annaloro was 19 years old when Prohibition began. His grocery store was the perfect cover. Real deliveries came and went. Who could say what was in those boxes? Who could prove that the truck making deliveries in the middle of the night was not just bringing more vegetables? The first sign of Angelo's criminal work shows up in police records from 1928. He was arrested for driving dangerously. That seems small, right? Just a ticket for bad driving. But during Prohibition, getting arrested for dangerous driving often meant one thing. It meant a person selling illegal alcohol was running from the police or from other criminals. The roads at night were full of special cars racing to deliver illegal alcohol, trying to get away from both the police and other gangs. This arrest was Angelo's first official problem with the law. It would not be his last during the Prohibition years. Angelo got involved with the local Philadelphia Mafia. It was known as La Cosa Nostra, which means our thing. The Philadelphia family had been around since at least the early 1900s. But Prohibition made it much more powerful and made it much more money. The group ran secret bars, controlled the routes for selling illegal alcohol, and protected illegal businesses all over the city. Young Angelo got the attention of Giuseppe Dovi, a well-known person in the Philadelphia world of criminals. Dovi used the name Joe Bruno, a name that Angelo would later take for himself. The connection between Dovi and Angelo is a bit of a secret in history books. But what is clear is that Dovey became Angelo's teacher in the world of crime. With Dovey's help, Angelo learned the real business of organized crime. It was not about big shows of violence or exciting shootouts. Those were things that beginners did. Who ended up dead or in jail? No, the real business was about plans, friendships, power, and most of all, being secret. Angelo started to change his name around this time. He stopped using Annaloro and started using Bruno, which was his grandmother's last name before she got married. There's a good reason for this. The name Bruno was shorter, easier for Americans to say, and it put some space between him and his family's legal businesses. It also showed respect for his teacher, Joe Bruno. By the late 1920s, Angelo Bruno was running his own businesses, mostly selling illegal alcohol and taking bets. The grocery store stayed open, giving him a cover and a legal way to make money. But his real money came from illegal alcohol and betting businesses. His arrest record got longer during this time. There were charges for having guns, for running an illegal alcohol business. He was arrested for illegal gambling and for having stolen things. Each arrest tells a story. Each charge shows another part of his growing criminal business. But here's what is amazing about Angelo Bruno's early criminal life. He stayed out of jail for long periods of time. He had small arrests, yes. And he paid fines and stayed in jail for short times for sure. But the long jail times that ruined so many young criminals, he avoided them. He did this with careful planning, good lawyers, and probably by paying off some important people. On December 5, 1933, Prohibition ended. After 13 years of trying to stop people from drinking alcohol, America gave up. The 21st Amendment got rid of the 18th. You could legally buy a beer again. For many people who sold illegal alcohol, this was a disaster. The main way they made money disappeared overnight. But men like Angelo Bruno had already started other businesses. Gambling, lending money at very high interest, and controlling workers' groups. These businesses did not need prohibition to make money. The systems built during the illegal alcohol years could be used for other criminal businesses. Angelo Bruno came out of Prohibition not as a rich man, not yet. But he was a known member of the Philadelphia criminal world with friends, experience, and big dreams in 1931. While America was going deeper into the Great Depression, while lines of people waiting for food stretched around city blocks and men sold apples on street corners just to get by, a 21-year-old Angelo Bruno did something very normal. He got married. Her name was Assunta Moranca, but everyone called her Sue. She was his sweetheart from when they were kids. She was a girl from the neighborhood who knew Angelo before the money, before he was known, before everything, in the messy world that Angelo lived in. A world of fighting, lying, and sudden death. Sue would be the one thing that never changed. They would stay married for 49 years, until death literally split them apart. The wedding was a traditional Italian Catholic one, probably in a church in South Philadelphia. It was followed by a party where two different worlds met. On one side were legal, working-class people from other countries. On the other side were known criminals, all celebrating in the same room, this double life. As a respected family man and a criminal boss, would be a part of Angelo's whole life. Angelo and Sue would have two children, Michael and Jean. The Bruno children would grow up in a simple house in a row of houses in South Philadelphia. It was never fancy, never showing off. This was not like other mob families where the bosses built huge houses and showed off their money. Angelo kept his home life separate and simple. His kids went to local schools, played with kids in the neighborhood, and went to church on Sundays from the outside. They looked like just another Italian-American family. But of course, they were not just another family. During the 1930s, as America had a hard time during the Depression, Angelo Bruno's criminal life did very well. He became what the Mafia calls a made man, a full member of the group. He was tied by promises made in blood and by old rules of honor. His sponsor was Michael Maggio, a man who had been found guilty of murder. He also happened to be the person who started Maggio Cheese Corporation. A successful legal business, this sponsorship is important. In La Cosa Nostra, you cannot just join. You have to be recommended by current members who risk their own name on your trustworthiness. Michael Maggio saw something in Angelo Bruno. He saw that Angelo was reliable, smart, and secret. Qualities that would help Angelo a lot in the years to come. 1934 was a very important time in Angelo Bruno's life. But no one knew how important it would be for many years. Angelo worked with a young Italian-American gangster named Carlo Gambino on a deal to buy and sell land. The details of this deal have been lost in time. There are no old records to show the exact land or deals that were made. But what happened is written down. Both men made a lot of money. More importantly, they became friends. Carlo Gambino would become one of the most powerful mafia bosses in American history. He would rule the Gambino crime family in New York for 20 years. He would be so successful that his name would be linked with organized crime itself. And through all those years of power, Carlo Gambino stayed Angelo Bruno's closest friend and most important helper. This friendship, started in a simple business deal in 1934, would later save Angelo's life. It would lift him up to the highest levels of organized crime, and in the end, it would shape the Philadelphia criminal world for many years. Never forget how powerful real friendships can be in a world built on lies and betrayal. During the 1930s, Angelo kept building his criminal businesses, while also putting money into legal businesses. He opened a company that gets rid of pests in Trenton, New Jersey. This was perfect for a criminal who needed reasons to travel and move things between states. He put money into an aluminum products company in Hialeah, Florida. This gave him business in a state that was quickly becoming a center for organized crime. He even got a part of a Plaza Hotel in Havana, Cuba. This put him in the middle of the gambling businesses in the Caribbean that were making millions for American gangsters before Fidel Castro took over. This way of mixing legal and illegal businesses was not just something Angelo did, but he did it with a special smartness. The legal businesses were not just for show. They were actually making money. They gave him legal income and tax papers that could pass a check. They also gave him reasons for his wealth at the same time. The illegal businesses made the real money, which was carefully cleaned through the legal businesses. To understand how Angelo Bruno became powerful, you need to understand the Philadelphia Mafia in the 1940s and 50s. And to be honest, it was a mess. The Philadelphia crime family, which later was officially known as the Bruno Scarfo crime family, was one of the first Italian-American mafia families. It was started in the early 1900s, but it was not like the mostly stable New York families or the well-behaved Chicago group. The Philadelphia family was known for fighting among themselves, constant struggles for power, and huge failures of its leaders. Boss after boss came and went. Salvatore Sabella ran the family in the 1920s and early 30s before he was forced to leave. Giuseppe Joe Bruno, who was not related to Angelo, took over for a short time. The 1940s had more instability, with different groups fighting for control. Bodies were found in the Delaware River or left in South Jersey for a young Angelo Bruno. Watching all this mess happen, the lessons were clear. Fighting is bad for business. Constant fighting gets the police's attention, messes up business, and kills the very people who make money. The bosses who lived the longest and did the best were not the most violent ones. They were the smartest ones. Angelo watched, learned, and got himself ready, while other young mobsters were trying to show how tough they were through fighting. Angelo showed how good he was through business smarts. He made money. He stayed out of jail. He built friendships with other families and criminal groups. He became someone that other criminals could work with, trust, and count on. By the 1950s, Angelo Bruno was a capo, or a captain, in the Philadelphia family. He ran his own group and controlled his own area. He had businesses all over South Philadelphia and southern New Jersey. His gambling and money-lending businesses were doing great. His friends in politics were growing, and his name as a calm, smart leader was spreading beyond Philadelphia to the other big crime families. The late 1950s brought a big problem. Joseph Ida, who had been the leader of the Philadelphia family since 1949, decided to quit. Historians argue about the reasons. Some say he wanted to go back to Italy and retire. Others think he was forced out because of bad health or problems within the group. Whatever the reason, when he left, there was a space for a new leader. Two men came forward to lead the family, Angelo Bruno and Antonio Polina. Who was known as Mr. Minx. Polina was older. He had been in the family longer, had more of the usual qualifications, and was respected by the older members, the Commission, the group that governed American Mafia families. Gave him the job. Angelo Bruno promised to support him. He knelt down, showed respect, and promised to be loyal from the outside. It looked like he was accepting his loss gracefully, but Antonio Polina did not trust him. Polina looked at Angelo Bruno and saw a danger, a competitor, someone who might try to take his place later. Polina made a decision that would turn out to be a disaster. He ordered Angelo Bruno to be killed. Picture this. You are Angelo Bruno in 1959. You are a successful captain making good money and are respected in the criminal world. You have just promised to be loyal to the new boss. Antonio Polina, you are doing your work, running your businesses and taking care of your family. And then you hear that Polina has ordered you to be killed. In the Mafia, this kind of betrayal is not strange. In fact, it is expected. Ambitious underbosses kill their leaders. Competing groups get rid of each other. The history of organized crime is written in blood. Most men in Angelo's situation would have maybe a few days of warning, if they were lucky, before a killer showed up and ended their life. But Angelo Bruno was not like most men, and more importantly, he had something that most men in his situation did not have. Carlo Gambino. Do you remember that real estate deal from 1934? Do you remember that friendship that started 25 years earlier? It was about to save Angelo's life. Angelo Bruno got in touch with his old friend. By 1959, Carlo Gambino was the boss of one of New York's 5 families. This was one of the most powerful jobs in American organized crime. When Gambino spoke, people listened. When he made requests, people obeyed. Gambino brought the problem to the Commission. The Commission was started in 1931 by Lucky Luciano as a way to solve arguments between mafia families and stop destructive wars. Think of it as a criminal Supreme Court, with the bosses of the big families acting as judges. In 1959, the Commission had members from New York's 5 families: Chicago, Buffalo, and Philadelphia. Gambino explained the situation. Angelo Bruno, a respected moneymaker and dependable leader, was about to be killed for no good reason by Antonio Polina. Polina was acting out of fear, not because of a real problem. Even worse, Polina was planning this killing without telling the Commission. This was a serious breaking of mafia rules. The Commission looked into it. They found that what Gambino said was true. Antonio Polina had broken the rules. He had tried to kill another MAID member without a good reason and without permission. The punishment for breaking such rules was usually death. But here's where the story gets interesting. In 1959, the Commission removed Antonio Polina and named Angelo Bruno as the new boss of the Philadelphia crime family. At 49 years old, Angelo Bruno reached the top of organized crime. He was one of only 9 men in America with a spot on the Commission. He ruled a family that controlled businesses all over Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey. The commission gave Angelo the power to decide what would happen to Polina. This is the usual way things are done. The man who is wronged gets to decide the punishment. And in the Mafia, with its old rules of revenge and family fights, everyone expected a killing. Antonio Polina tried to have Angelo killed. According to Mafia justice, he should die. It is that simple. No one would question it. No one would say no. It is just how things are done. Angelo Bruno let him live. He moved Polina down to soldier, the lowest position in the group. He took away all his power and made him work for the very man he tried to kill. It was very embarrassing for Polina, for sure, but he lived. This single act of kindness created Angelo Bruno's reputation from that moment on. He was known as the Gentle Don. Throughout the violent criminal world, the story spread. Angelo Bruno, when he had every right to kill his enemy, chose to be kind instead. Some people thought it was a sign of weakness. Many more thought it was a sign of wisdom. Bruno's way of leading was new in the Mafia world. He believed that fighting should be the very last choice. Not the first one. He liked to use bribes instead of bullets. And talking instead of death. He saw organized crime like a CEO sees a company. As a business to be run well and to make money. Think about the usual Mafia boss of that time. They ruled by making people afraid. They made examples of people who did not obey. They solved arguments with guns and car bombs. Their time as leaders was marked by big fights that filled newspapers and brought in federal police. Angelo Bruno did things a different way. He made smart deals with groups that other Mafia families would never work with. He worked with African American gangs in North Philadelphia, Irish groups in the suburbs, and even motorcycle gangs that controlled some drug routes. All of them worked in Bruno's territory, and all of them paid him a share, but they were allowed to work. He did not try to get rid of them. He turned possible enemies into business partners. His area was huge. It included all of Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey. His businesses included taking bets, lending money at high interest, controlling workers' groups, and different kinds of gambling. The money that moved through his group was a lot. Millions of dollars every year, maybe even tens of millions. And he spoke out against selling drugs. This position on drugs is important to understand. By the 1960s, selling drugs, mostly heroin, was becoming extremely profitable. Other Mafia families were making a lot of money from it. But Bruno officially told his family members not to get involved in the junk business, as he called it. His reason was a practical one. Selling drugs brought a lot of attention from the federal police. The punishments were very tough, and unlike usual Mafia activities like gambling or lending money, which many politicians and police quietly allowed or even took part in, drug dealing had no one on its side. No one was on the side of heroin sellers. So Bruno banned it, and for the most part, his ban was followed, at least in public. The Pax Bruno, or Bruno's Peace, had started. It was 2 decades of relative quiet in the Philadelphia criminal world. 1960 through 1979, these were Angelo Bruno's best years. While other cities had mob wars and police crackdowns, Philadelphia stayed pretty quiet. While other bosses served long prison sentences, Bruno served very little time. While other families tore each other apart with fights inside the group, the Philadelphia family ran smoothly. How did he do it? First, Bruno stayed away from the kind of big, public violence that gets the media's attention. There were no public killings, no car bombs on crowded streets, no mass killings that made the front page of the news when fighting was needed. It was done quietly, secretly, and professionally. Bodies disappeared into rivers or were buried in far-off places. The message was sent. But the public did not need to know about it. Second, Bruno put a lot of money into corrupting politicians. He gave smart donations to political campaigns. He did favors for politicians, judges, and police officers. They were not always obvious bribes, but the kind of relationships that helped both sides. This made people not want to look into him too closely. He had friends at City Hall, in the state government, and even in the federal government. Third, Bruno truly ran his group like a business. He had regular meetings with his captains, talked about business, solved arguments, and made smart choices based on how much money could be made and how much risk was involved. He kept detailed records in his head of who owed what to whom. He knew which businesses were making money and which ones needed to be stopped. He treated his soldiers like workers, not like pieces that could be thrown away. His personal life stayed simple. He still lived in that same row house in South Philadelphia, drove a simple car, and wore suits that were not custom-made. He went to church on Sunday, had dinner with his family, and celebrated holidays like any normal Italian-American grandfather. His neighbors knew who he was, or at least they guessed, but he was respectful. He was quiet and never caused problems. He would shovel snow from sidewalks, wave hello to people passing by, and give big tips at local restaurants. This self-control was a smart move. Bruno understood that showing off wealth gets attention from thieves, from the police, and from jealous enemies. It was better to look like a moderately successful business person than a rich gangster. Even with his careful way of doing things, Bruno was not safe from arrest. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, he was brought in for questioning many times. He was arrested for different charges and called to speak before grand juries. His longest time in jail came when he refused to speak before a grand jury that was looking into organized crime. He was in jail for 2 years for not cooperating with the court. 2 years. That was the worst jail sentence Angelo Bruno ever got in his whole criminal life. Compare this to other big mob bosses. Vito Genovese died in a federal prison. Carlo Gambino was constantly being taken to court. Paul Castellano would be charged just before he was killed. Joe Bonanno ran away to avoid being arrested. Sam Giancana was always being bothered by the FBI. Bruno seemed almost impossible to touch. Was he lucky? Definitely. Was he smart? For sure. Was he paying the right people? Almost certainly. The FBI knew about him. They had files, pictures from watching him, and recordings from his phone. The Philadelphia office of the FBI spent a lot of time and money looking into organized crime, and Bruno was their main target. But getting charges to stick against someone as careful as Angelo Bruno was very hard. He did not put anything in writing. He did not talk about criminal activities on phones that he knew were being listened to. He had secret meetings in different places that changed often. He used other people to give orders, which created layers of protection between himself and criminal acts. And when he had to talk about business, he spoke in a code that was unclear enough to sound innocent, but it was clear enough for his men to understand throughout Bruno's time as boss. His friendship with Carlo Gambino was key to his power. They met often, sometimes in New York, sometimes in Philadelphia, and sometimes at secret places in New Jersey. They talked about business, shared information, and planned activities that covered many cities. Carlo Gambino became the boss of his New York family in 1957. He would rule until he died in 1976. That's almost 20 years of leadership that was known for careful planning and smart thinking. Does that sound familiar? Gambino and Bruno had the same ideas. They wanted quiet, effective, and profitable businesses without unneeded fighting or public attention. Both men were old-school members of La Cosa Nostra. They believed in old values like honor, loyalty, respect for leaders, and careful thinking before acting. They both came from Sicily originally, shared the same culture, and understood the old rules. In a changing world where younger mobsters were becoming more violent and careless, Gambino and Bruno were part of a dying type of leader. The New York-Philadelphia connection created by their friendship was powerful. New York's 5 families were the most powerful in American organized crime, and Gambino's family was becoming the strongest of the five. Having Gambino's friendship meant having protection, access, and respect that other local bosses could only dream of. When other families had arguments with Philadelphia, Gambino helped solve them. When Bruno needed support at commission meetings, Gambino supported him. When federal police threatened Bruno, Gambino's lawyers, the best you could buy, were there to help. But there was a conflict growing underneath everything. It was a lie that would eventually destroy everything Bruno built. Remember Bruno's public position on drugs, his official rule against selling drugs, and his reputation as the mob boss who refused to sell heroin was mostly false. The people closest to Bruno knew the truth. While he officially banned drug dealing in his family, he secretly allowed some friends to do it. This was especially true for Carlo Gambino's Sicilian cousins, who ran a drug business in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Cherry Hill is just across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. Maybe a 20-minute drive, it was right in the middle of Bruno's territory. And yet, with Bruno's permission, the Gambino family Sicilian group ran a complex heroin-selling business there. They made millions of dollars every year. Bruno got his share, of course, a part of the profits. Cleaned through different businesses, showed up in his bank accounts. He was making huge amounts of money from the very drug trade he publicly spoke against. Why was he being a hypocrite? There were several reasons. First, he really did not want his own family members selling drugs. The federal punishments were too harsh. And Bruno could not protect his men from long jail sentences if they were caught with drugs. Second, by letting Gambino's people work, he made his friendship with New York's most powerful family stronger. Third, the money was just too good to say no to. But being a hypocrite makes people angry, and in Bruno's own family, younger members were watching with more and more anger. They saw New York gangsters getting rich from drugs in Philadelphia's territory. They saw their boss taking a share of that money while telling them they could not do the same. They saw what looked like weakness, playing favorites and selling out to New York. The seeds of betrayal were being planted. In 1976, voters in New Jersey approved a new law to make casino gambling legal in Atlantic City. The law passed by a small amount, but it passed, and all of a sudden, a dying beach town located right in Angelo Bruno's territory became a possible gold mine. Atlantic City in the 1970s was a sad place. It was once a fancy destination, the place that inspired the board game Monopoly. With its boardwalk and park place, the city had gone downhill in a big way. City decay, poverty, crime, and competition from Las Vegas had turned Atlantic City into a ghost of what it used to be. But casino gambling promised to change everything. Builders were already planning huge casino hotels. Big companies were putting in millions of dollars. And everyone expected the mafia to force their way into the business. That is what had happened in Las Vegas many years before. And Atlantic City was much closer to big cities on the East Coast. Angelo Bruno had a very important choice to make. Atlantic City was in his territory according to old mafia rules. He could claim the only rights to the casino businesses there. He could demand a share from every casino, control workers' groups, run gambling and money-lending businesses, and possibly make tens of millions of dollars. But Bruno knew that Atlantic City was too big for Philadelphia alone. If he tried to control it all by himself, New York's 5 families would object. Chicago might want a piece. Other families would see Atlantic City as too valuable to leave to Philadelphia. Fighting over it could start a huge mob war. So Bruno made a smart choice that would save lives in the short run, but cost him everything in the long run. He said Atlantic City was open for everyone. The commission agreed to his idea. Atlantic City would be run by many families working together. Everyone could have a piece. The Philadelphia family would definitely be involved. But so would New York, New Jersey, and other groups. Working together instead of fighting, peace instead of war. Other commission bosses respected this choice. It showed he was mature, wise, and thinking about the future. Bruno was putting the good of all organized crime before his own family's small interests. He was stopping bloodshed and attention from the federal police. But younger members of Bruno's own family saw it differently. To them, Bruno had just given away a lot of money. Atlantic City should have belonged only to Philadelphia. Instead, Bruno was sharing it, letting New York families take what should have been theirs. They saw it as weakness, as giving up, as proof that the gentle Don was too gentle. They thought he was too willing to give in and too afraid of New York. Names started to be whispered in bars and social clubs in South Philadelphia. Names of younger mobsters who thought they could do better. They wanted the drug money that Bruno was not letting them have. They wanted their full share of Atlantic City. They thought the old man had lost his touch. The most dangerous name being whispered was Antonio Caponegro. Known as Tony Bananas, he was Bruno's consigliere. His most trusted advisor, Antonio Caponegro, was born in Chicago in 1912, which made him just 2 years younger than Bruno. He got his nickname Tony Bananas from something that happened when he was young. The stories are different on what exactly happened, but the name stuck. He had been a member of the Philadelphia family for many years. He moved up in the group and earned Bruno's trust as his consigliere. Caponegro was Bruno's main advisor, the number 2 or 3 most powerful person in the family. He went to commission meetings, helped make smart choices, and solved fights within the group. He had been loyal for years. But by the late 1970s, that loyalty was breaking. Caponegro looked around and saw chances being missed. The drug business was making huge amounts of money for other families. Atlantic City was being shared when it should have been controlled. Bruno was almost 70 years old. He seemed more and more out of touch with what the younger generation wanted. And Caponegro was not the only one thinking this way. Other members of the family felt the same way. Younger soldiers saw their friends in other cities getting rich while they were stuck with old businesses that made much less money. Captains felt Bruno was too old-fashioned, too careful, and too influenced by New York. The whispers got louder, the complaints became bolder. And Tony Bananas started to think the unthinkable. What if Angelo Bruno was gone in the Mafia? There's a strict way to get rid of a boss. You need the commission's approval. You need to show proof that he is not doing a good job, that he has betrayed them, or that he has serious disagreements on policy. You need support from other families. You need everything to be done right, according to the old rules. Antonio Caponegro talked himself into believing that he could skip this process. His thinking was dangerously wrong. He believed that once Bruno was dead, the commission would just accept it as something that had already happened. He thought that his job as consigliere gave him a good reason to be the leader. He thought that other families would see Bruno's removal as a Philadelphia problem and stay out of it. He was completely and terribly wrong on every point. Caponegro started to get people to help him. He needed people close to Bruno, people who could get to him. The most important person he got was John Stanfa, Bruno's driver. John Stanfa was an immigrant from Sicily who had come to America in 1967. He had worked his way into Bruno's close circle and eventually became the boss's personal driver. This was a job with a huge amount of trust. The driver knows everything. He knows where you are going, who you are meeting with, and when you are not protected in the Mafia, your driver is often the person you trust the most. Stanfa agreed to be part of the plan. We will never know for sure if he was promised money, power, or if he was just afraid of Caponegro. But he agreed to betray the man who trusted him with his life. The date was chosen. March 21st, 1980, Friday evening. March 21st, 1980, spring was just starting in Philadelphia. The weather was cool but nice. People were out walking, enjoying the first signs of warmer days to come. Angelo Bruno, who was 69 years old, had just finished dinner. He had been out with John Stanfa, his driver and trusted friend. There was nothing strange about the evening. Just dinner. The conversation was normal. Bruno was relaxed and comfortable after 21 years as boss. And after surviving many possible dangers, he was sure of his safety. Stanfa drove Bruno back to his home in South Philadelphia. The row house was at 934 Snyder Avenue, near the corner of 10th Street and Snyder. In the lower Moyamensing neighborhood, Bruno had lived here for many years. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him. It was his castle, his safe place. The car pulled up outside the house. It did not park in a driveway. Bruno did not have a driveway, so it just parked on the street. It was like any other car in this working-class neighborhood. Row houses were on both sides of the street. They had the same brick fronts, small front steps, the style of old Philadelphia. Bruno stayed in the passenger seat. He was not in a hurry. Maybe he was finishing a talk with Stanfa. Maybe he was smoking a cigarette. Bruno was a smoker. Maybe he was just sitting and enjoying the quiet evening. John Stanfa, sitting in the driver's seat, gave a signal. We do not know what the signal was. It could have been a hand movement, a word, or a motion. But it was planned ahead of time. It meant, now. A man walked up from behind the car. Bruno did not see him coming. The man was carrying a shotgun, a weapon often used for mob killings because it is so deadly at a close distance. The killer raised the shotgun, put it behind Bruno's right ear, and fired one shot. That is all it took. The blast was huge in the quiet night. Blood and pieces of brain exploded all over the inside of the car, covering the dashboard, the windshield, and Stanfa. Angelo Bruno fell forward, dead before he could even understand what was happening. 21 years of peace ended in a split second. John Stanfa, covered in his boss's blood, would later say he was hit by the shot. He said it was a small wound that needed very little care. We will never know for sure if this wound was real or faked, but it gave him a story to tell. He could say he was a victim too, not a helper in the plan. Neighbors heard the shotgun blast. Doors opened. People looked out. Someone called the police within minutes. Sirens were getting closer. The Philadelphia Police Department arrived to find a scene they had seen before, but never quite like this. Mob killings happen. They are a part of life in some neighborhoods, but this was Angelo Bruno, the man who kept the peace for 2 decades. He was the boss who stayed away from fighting. The gentle Don. The news spread through the criminal world like a fire. There were phone calls with secret words. There were urgent meetings. There was shock, fear, and confusion. If Bruno could be killed, anyone could be killed. If the rules that protected a commission member could be broken, then no rules meant anything anymore. The killing of Angelo Bruno made the front page of the news, not just in Philadelphia, but all over the country. The New York Times wrote a story about it. The television news covered it for most Americans. This was their first time hearing about Angelo Bruno. They learned about him only after he died. The funeral was held at the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church in South Philadelphia. It was the same church where Bruno and Sue were married 49 years before. Hundreds of people came. Family members were there, of course. Sue Bruno was heartbroken with her children, Michael and Zhang, by her side. But there were also mobsters from many cities, paying their respects and watching each other carefully. They were trying to figure out what would happen next. The FBI was there too, taking pictures of everyone who came. They wrote down who talked to whom, adding names to their growing files on organized crime. Bruno was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Yeton, Pennsylvania, a Catholic cemetery just outside of Philadelphia. The gravestone was simple and plain. Just like the man himself, there was no big fancy tomb. There was no showy display of wealth. Just a simple marker. It said, Angelo Bruno. May 21, 1910. March 21, 1980. But while Philadelphia was sad and the police were looking into the crime, something much more important was happening in New York. The commission was meeting, and they were very angry. The killing of a commission member without permission is the most serious breaking of mafia law. It hits the very core of the whole group structure. If bosses can be killed without permission, then it is all chaos. The whole reason for the commission, started by Lucky Luciano almost 50 years earlier, was to stop exactly this kind of unapproved violence. The commission immediately started to investigate. Who ordered the killing? Who did it? Who knew about it? The answers came quickly. Tony "Bananas" Caponegro did not hide his part in it very well. In fact, he seemed to have expected to be celebrated, not investigated. He thought he had done everyone a favor by getting rid of an old, weak boss. The commission called Caponegro to New York. He went, which was another huge mistake. He apparently believed he would be named the new Philadelphia boss. He thought he would be rewarded for taking action. Instead, he was signing his own death paper. In April 1980, less than a month after Angelo Bruno's murder, Antonio Caponegro and his brother-in-law, Alfred Salerno, were found dead in the South Bronx, New York. But these were not clean mob killings. These were messages. Caponegro's body was found stuffed in the trunk of a car. He was naked and wrapped in black plastic bags, and here's the part that became famous. Torn $20 bills had been stuffed into his mouth and his bottom. The meaning was clear, cruel, and meant to be understood by everyone in the criminal world. You killed for money, you die with money. You broke sacred rules for greed. Here is your reward. Caponegro had not just been shot. The state of his body showed he was tortured before he died. It was long and cruel torture. They wanted him to suffer, to fully understand what his betrayal had cost him before they finally ended his life. Alfred Salerno's body was found about a mile away in Harding Park. He was also naked, also wrapped in plastic, and also showed signs of being tortured. Salerno's part in the plan was small. He was Caponegro's brother-in-law, a helper. But the commission did not make any exceptions. Everyone involved would pay the highest price. Other people who helped were hunted down one by one. Some were killed right away. Others disappeared, and their bodies were never found. John Stanfa, the driver who set up Bruno, got away with it at first. His part was not clear right away, and he did a good job of playing the victim, but his time would come. The commission's message was heard all through the world of organized crime. The rules matter. You cannot kill a boss without permission. Antonio Caponegro thought he could get around the system, and he died a horrible death for it. But here is the sad twist. The commission's revenge did not bring back peace. It did not return Philadelphia to the stable times of the Bruno years. Instead, Caponegro's murder was just the first in a wave of violence that would trouble Philadelphia for 2 decades. The box had been opened, the peace was broken. And once violence becomes normal, it is almost impossible to stop. In April 1980, with Tony Bananas dead and the people who helped him gone, the commission needed to pick a new boss for the Philadelphia family. They chose Philip Testa. Testa was Bruno's underboss, the second in charge, which made him the clear choice to take over. He was 60 years old, an old-school mobster who had worked with Bruno for years. His nickname was the Chicken Man, which he got because his family had a chicken business in South Philadelphia. It was not exactly scary, but nicknames in the mob often come from everyday things. Testa promised to bring back order. He promised to keep Bruno's ways, or at least the ones that worked. He told the commission that Philadelphia would become stable under his leadership. He had 1 year on March 15, 1981, just a few days before the 1-year anniversary of Bruno's murder. Philip Testa was walking up to his home in South Philadelphia. It was late at night, around 2:30 in the morning. Testa had been at a meeting, taking care of family business. He walked up to his front door, put his key in, and opened it. The nail bomb exploded. Nail bombs are especially mean devices. The explosive part, like dynamite, is packed with nails, screws, and metal pieces when it goes off. These pieces fly out like shrapnel from a grenade. They are designed to cause the most damage to a person's body. The bomb was attached to the front door. When Testa opened it, he set off the device. The explosion tore his body apart. Neighbors heard the blast from blocks away. Windows broke. The front of Testa's house was destroyed. Philip, the chicken man Testa, was killed right away after only 1 year as boss. His time as leader ended in the biggest and most dramatic killing Philadelphia has ever seen. The murder made national news. It was too big and too violent to ignore. But it also found its way into pop culture in a surprising way. Bruce Springsteen, the famous rock musician from New Jersey, wrote a song called Atlantic City. It is a sad, dark song about having no money and the hope of getting rich from gambling. And the first line of the song talks about Testa's murder. Well, they blew up the chicken man in Philly last night. Now they blew up his house too. The song became one of Springsteen's most famous works, forever connecting Philip Testa's violent death to American music history. The Chicken Man became famous not for what he did, but for how dramatically he died. The investigation into Testa's murder showed another plan from inside the group. The bomb was planted by members of his own organization, working with enemies who wanted to be in charge. The Philadelphia family was destroying itself. After Philip Testa's murder, the commission had a big problem. Who could possibly control the Philadelphia family? 2 bosses had been murdered in just over a year. There were plans from within. Constant fighting. The family was in chaos. They turned to Nicodemo, little Nicky Scarfo. This choice would turn out to be a disaster. Nicky Scarfo was born in Brooklyn in 1929. But he grew up in South Philadelphia. He was short, which is why he got the nickname Little Nicky. He was only 5 feet 5 inches tall. But what he was missing in height, he made up for with his meanness. Scarfo had been sent to Atlantic City by Angelo Bruno years earlier. He was basically kicked out of Philadelphia for being too violent, even for mob standards, while Bruno ran a fairly peaceful group. Scarfo was stabbing people in arguments, causing unneeded problems, and getting unwanted attention. But now, with Bruno dead and Testa blown to pieces, Scarfo was brought back and made the boss. It was like putting gasoline on a fire to try and put it out. Scarfo's time as boss from 1981 to 1991 was marked by fear, violence, and huge failure. He saw enemies everywhere. He ordered murders for the smallest sign of disrespect. He ruled by making people terrified. This was different from the respect and talking that Bruno had built under Scarfo. The Philadelphia family became the most violent crime group in America. Bodies piled up. Shootings became a regular thing. The police could not keep up with all the killing, and very importantly, all this violence brought exactly the kind of federal attention that Bruno had avoided for 2 decades. The FBI, the DA, and state police put a lot of people and money into investigating the Philadelphia mob. People started to talk to the police, terrified of Scarfo's craziness. Wiretaps recorded conversations that proved they were guilty. RICO cases, which came from the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, gave the police powerful ways to take down the whole organization. Among the new stars in the Philadelphia family in the early 1980s was Salvatore Testa. Known as Salvi, he was the son of the murdered Chicken Man. Salvi Testa was in his 20s when his father was killed. He was young, handsome, ambitious, and completely set on getting revenge for his father's death. He was everything a young mobster was supposed to be. He was tough, loyal, and willing to be violent without thinking twice. Scarfo moved Salvi up through the ranks quickly. He became a made member, then a captain. He was given more and more responsibility and respect. Salvi was involved in many murders, helping to get rid of the men who killed his father. He was becoming one of the most dangerous and effective killers in the organization. But in the fearful world of Nicky Scarfo's leadership, being successful was dangerous. On September 14, 1984, Salvatore Testa was invited to a meeting by members of his own crew. He went without worry. These were men he had known for years. They were men he had committed crimes with. They were men he trusted. They shot him many times. His body was found in a shallow grave in New Jersey. It was wrapped in plastic with a bullet hole in the back of his head. The murder of Salvi shocked even the toughest criminals. This was Philip Testa's son. He had been getting revenge for his father. He had been loyal to the organization, and Scarfo had ordered his death anyway. It seems it was because Salvi was becoming too popular, too respected, and too much of a possible threat. The Testa family line was wiped out. Father and son were both murdered by their own organization within 3 years of each other. This murder, in particular, started to turn members of the family against Scarfo. If Salvi Testa was not safe, no one was safe. Loyalty meant nothing. Service meant nothing. Scarfo would kill anyone. Anytime, for any reason, the organization was dying from the inside. Throughout the 1980s, federal police were building cases against the Philadelphia mob. Every murder, every crime, and every conversation caught on a wiretap became evidence. Informants gave inside testimony. The RICO laws allowed the police to charge whole organizations, not just single crimes. 1987 was a turning point. Nicky Scarfo and 16 members of his organization were charged with many crimes. These included murder, racketeering, extortion, and drug trafficking. The trial became a huge media event. Philadelphia's mob, once so carefully hidden by Angelo Bruno, was now completely shown to the public. Former members became government witnesses, telling in detail about years of criminal activity. The code of silence that had protected the Mafia for many years was breaking down. Men who were facing life in prison decided that being loyal to an organization was not worth dying in prison for. In 1988, Nicky Scarfo was found guilty and given a 55-year prison sentence. He was 60 years old. This was basically a life sentence. Other members of his organization got similar sentences. The leadership was destroyed, but the court cases did not stop. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, federal and state police kept hammering the Philadelphia mob. New bosses were chosen and then put in prison. Captains turned and testified. The organization that Angelo Bruno once ruled with such careful smarts was now just a few low-level criminals doing small-time jobs. John Stanfa, remember him, Bruno's driver who betrayed him, ended up becoming boss himself in the early 1990s, but he was completely terrible at it, starting another mob war and getting himself a life sentence in prison by 1996. By the year 2000, the Philadelphia crime family hardly existed. It went from being one of the most stable and profitable mafia groups in America to a group of old criminals and wannabe gangsters with little real power or say. The difference from Bruno's time could not be clearer. Let's take a moment to understand the amount of violence that happened after Angelo Bruno's death. Between 1980 and 2000, in just 20 years, the Philadelphia mob and other crime groups saw over 30 murders. Some people think the number is even higher. If you count people who disappeared and unsolved cases that were likely tied to mob activity. Compare this to Bruno's 21 years as boss, where violence was definitely there, but it was carefully controlled and kept to a minimum. Bruno's idea that peace made more money than war was not just a moral stance. It was a practical business plan that worked for 2 decades. After he died, the numbers tell the story. In 1980, Bruno was murdered. Caponegro and his helpers were killed. In 1981, Philip Testa was killed. plus many of his helpers from 1982 through 1984. There were over a dozen murders as Scarfo took control. In 1984, Salvatore Testa was murdered. From 1985 through 1990, there was non-stop violence as Scarfo's fear grew. From 1990 through 2000, there were more murders as different groups fought for control. Each murder means a life ended. A family was destroyed. A community was scared. These were not just criminals killing other criminals. Innocent people got caught in the middle. Witnesses were killed. Family members were targeted. South Philadelphia, which had been pretty peaceful when Bruno was in charge, became a war zone. People who lived there were scared. Businesses closed. The Italian-American community, which had lived with the mob for years with a kind of careful acceptance, turned against organized crime. The FBI's Philadelphia office, which had a hard time making cases during Bruno's time, suddenly had more evidence than they could handle. Witnesses came forward. Informants appeared. The wall of silence fell apart. To understand Angelo Bruno's full effect on American crime, we need to talk about one of the biggest mysteries of the 20th century. It's the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. James Riddle Hoffa was born in 1913 in Brazil, Indiana. He got involved in organizing workers during the Great Depression. He eventually rose to become president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the most powerful workers' unions in America under Hoffa's leadership. The Teamsters Union grew hugely in the number of members, political power, and money power. But Hoffa's success was partly built on his connections to the mob. He worked closely with organized crime families all over the country. He let them use union money, let them control some local groups, and generally made a relationship that helped both sides. The mob helped Hoffa become powerful. Hoffa helped the mob make money. Angelo Bruno was one of the mob bosses who worked with Hoffa. The Teamsters had a big presence in Pennsylvania, and Bruno's control over workers' unions in his area crossed with Hoffa's work. They were not exactly friends, but more like business partners who understood how valuable each other was. In 1967, Jimmy Hoffa was found guilty of tampering with a jury, trying to bribe someone, and fraud. He was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. This was terrible for Hoffa, but it barely bothered the mob. They quickly found other labor leaders to work with. Hoffa was no longer important to their work. In 1971, President Richard Nixon shortened Hoffa's sentence. The condition was that he could not be involved in union work until 1980. Hoffa was let out of prison, but he was effectively banned from the Teamsters leadership he once controlled. But Hoffa could not accept being forced to retire. He started to campaign to get back into the union leadership, making noise, causing problems, and worse. There were rumors that he might work with federal police. He might give testimony about mob connections. He might bring down powerful people to help his comeback. On July 30th, 1975, at 2:30 in the afternoon, at Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, Jimmy Hoffa arrived for a meeting with Anthony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official with strong mob connections, and Anthony Giacalone, a Detroit mobster. Hoffa waited in the parking lot. His partners never showed up, but someone did. Hoffa was seen getting into a car. And then Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, 45 years later. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is still officially not solved. His body has never been found. No one has ever been successfully charged with his murder. The case has created endless theories, supposed confessions, and huge investigations that have not led to any final answers. But one theory connects right to Angelo Bruno. In 2004, a man named Frank Sheeran was dying. Sheeran was a Teamsters official and mob helper connected to Russell Bufalino, the boss of the Bufalino crime family that controlled parts of Pennsylvania. On his deathbed, Sheeran confessed to killing Jimmy Hoffa. According to Sheeran's confession, Russell Bufalino ordered the killing. Sheeran claims he picked up Hoffa from the restaurant, drove him to an empty house in Detroit, and shot him twice in the back of the head. Hoffa's body was then gotten rid of. Sheeran's story changes on exactly how, but he hints that it was burned or buried where it would never be found. The confession becomes the basis for a book, I Heard You Paint Houses, which was later made into Martin Scorsese's movie, The Irishman. So where does Angelo Bruno fit into this story? Russell Bufalino's crime family worked in northeastern Pennsylvania. Not Philadelphia, but it was close enough that they had to work together. Bufalino and Bruno would have known each other, worked together on some things, and kept the kind of friendly relationship that neighboring mob bosses needed. If Bufalino ordered Hoffa's killing, he probably would have told Bruno, just as a nice gesture if nothing else. Philadelphia was close to Detroit in distance and close to the Teamsters in business. Bruno might have even given his okay or help. But here is the frustrating truth: we do not know. Frank Sheeran's confession has been questioned by investigators. Some details do not match the evidence. Some things he claims seem made up. Sheeran might have been telling the truth, or trying to get attention, or remembering things wrong from many years ago. Blood evidence was found in the Detroit house Sheeran described, but it was old and hard to match for sure to Hoffa. Scientific analysis of the crime scene gave some support, but no proof. Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is still a mystery. Angelo Bruno's possible part in is still just a guess. And that is probably how it will stay. In 2019, Martin Scorsese, who is probably the greatest director of crime movies in history, released The Irishman on Netflix. The movie starred Robert De Niro as Frank Sheeran, Al Pacino as Jimmy Hoffa, and Joe Pesci as Russell Bufalino. It also had Harvey Keitel as Angelo Bruno, for a new generation of people watching, many of whom had never heard of Angelo Bruno. This movie became their first introduction. Keitel played Bruno as a smart, strategic, and dangerous man, even though he was calm. He was shown at commission meetings talking about the Hoffa problem and representing Philadelphia's interests. The movie takes some liberties with the story, as all historical movies do. But it gets something important about Bruno right. It's the idea that in a world of loud, violent, attention-seeking criminals, the quietest voice could be the most powerful. Bruno has been in other movies and television shows about organized crime. He is usually a small character. The 1993 movie Hoffa, starring Jack Nicholson, has a character based on Bruno. Different documentaries about the Mafia have had parts about Philadelphia and Bruno's leadership. But The Irishman brought Bruno into the public's mind in a way nothing else had. Suddenly, people were searching for Angelo Bruno on the internet. They were reading about the Gentle Don, about the Philadelphia mob, and about the 21 years of relative peace followed by many years of bloodshed. The movie sparked new interest in Bruno's legacy. It led to debates about his way of handling organized crime and discussions about whether his methods could have worked in today's world. Throughout Angelo Bruno's criminal career, the FBI kept large files on him thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. Many of these files have been unsealed and made public. They give a very interesting look into how federal law enforcement saw Bruno. The FBI thought of Bruno as one of 9 major mob bosses in America. During his time as boss, they put him in the same group as Carlo Gambino, Sam Giancana, and other famous figures. A special Philadelphia strike force was created partly because of Bruno's organization. It brought together FBI agents, IRS investigators, and local police to focus on organized crime. The files have pictures from surveillance showing Bruno at different places. They show restaurants where he held meetings, social clubs where he did business, and his simple row house in South Philadelphia. They have records of his travels, his partners, and his known criminal activities. Transcripts from wiretaps show Bruno's careful way of talking. He rarely talked about specific crimes on the phone. He used secret language, spoke in general terms, and assumed every conversation was being listened to. Because it probably was, reading through these FBI files many years later. What is surprising is the tone of reluctant respect from the agents. While they were recording his crimes and building cases against him, there was a sense that Bruno was different from other mob bosses. He was smarter, more careful, and harder to catch. One FBI report from the 1970s says that Bruno had avoided long prison sentences, even after many years of criminal activity. This was something very rare for someone at his level. The report looks at his methods. He used political corruption. He carefully separated his businesses. He kept violence to a minimum so it would not attract federal attention. The FBI knew exactly what Bruno was doing. They just could not prove it in court. They could not prove it well enough to put him away for life. And that drove them crazy. When Bruno was murdered in 1980, FBI agents who knew his case predicted what would happen next. Chaos, violence, and eventually the destruction of the Philadelphia family. They were absolutely right. Let's step back and look at what made Angelo Bruno's way of doing organized crime different, and why it worked for 2 decades before failing so badly. Bruno treated the Mafia like a big company. This was not a brand new idea, Meyer Lansky. The Jewish gangster who worked closely with Italian-American mobs had used similar methods, but Bruno used company-like thinking more often than most. His business plan had several key parts. Managing risk. Violence gets attention from the police, the media, and the public. Bruno kept violence to a minimum, which lowered his risk when violence was needed. It was done secretly, professionally, and in ways that did not get publicity, making the most money. Peace makes more money than war during mob wars. Businesses shut down, people hide. Money stops coming in during peaceful times. Businesses run smoothly and make a steady income. Bruno understood that steady, reliable money over 20 years was better than huge but short-term gains. Political investment. Bruno spent a lot of money corrupting politicians, judges, and police officers. These were not just bribes. They were investments that brought back big rewards. A friendly police captain was worth more than a dozen gunmen. Smart partnerships instead of fighting every possible competitor. Bruno made partnerships. African-American gangs, Irish groups, and motorcycle clubs all worked in his territory and all paid him a share. But they were allowed to work. This created stability and gave him different sources of income. Thinking long-term, Bruno made choices based on what would happen in the long run, not on quick feelings. When Antonio Polina tried to kill him, Bruno could have had him killed. Instead, he let him live, which earned him a reputation for being merciful that helped him for years. Compare this to other mob bosses of that time. Al Capone had spectacular violence, got huge publicity, was caught for not paying taxes, and died in prison. John Gotti, the dapper Don who loved attention, was photographed all the time and eventually was put in prison for life. Sam Giancana was extremely violent, got constant federal attention, and was ultimately killed. Bruno avoided all these mistakes. He was boring. He was boring on purpose. And boring mobsters tend to live longer and make more money than exciting ones. Angelo Bruno's business plan worked for 21 years because of specific things in history that worked in his favor. The change in law enforcement after the war, after World War II. The FBI and other federal agencies were becoming more modern. They were using new technologies and methods to fight organized crime. J. Edgar Hoover, who had for a long time denied that the Mafia even existed, finally admitted it in the 1960s. This meant that well-known mobsters were watched more closely. Bruno understood this new situation. While other bosses kept working like it was the Prohibition era, Bruno changed. He knew that the old ways of spectacular violence and public shows of power would only attract the newly powerful FBI. The television age, the 1960s, brought televisions into most American homes. News coverage of mob activities became wider and more immediate. A car bombing in 1960 was national news within hours. Bruno kept his family off television by keeping them out of big, shocking crimes, the commission system. Bruno got a huge benefit from his seat on the commission and his friendship with Carlo Gambino. The commission provided a structure, a way to solve problems, and rules that stopped constant fighting between families. Bruno did well in this structured system because he understood how to work within it. Pennsylvania's political culture. Pennsylvania politics in the mid-20th century was known for being corrupt. Philadelphia had a long history of political machines, systems of giving favors, and officials who were willing to look the other way for the right price. Bruno used this culture perfectly, building political connections that protected him for many years. The Atlantic City decision, maybe strangely, Bruno's choice to declare Atlantic City as open territory, which would eventually lead to his downfall, was actually smart in the short term. It stopped a huge mob war that would have brought federal attention to Philadelphia and likely ended Bruno's rule years earlier. Bruno's plan worked because he correctly understood his situation and changed his methods to fit it. He was not a revolutionary, he was a smart evolutionist. He took proven criminal methods and changed them for a changing America. If Angelo Bruno's way was so successful, why did it finally fail? Why was he murdered by his own group? Why could his plan not survive? The answer is complicated and includes many things that came together in the late 1970s. The drug money problem. This is maybe the single biggest issue. By the 1970s, selling drugs, especially heroin and cocaine, was making profits that were much bigger than traditional mob businesses. A successful drug business could make more in a year than gambling and money lending made in a decade. Bruno publicly said he was against drug selling, but privately he made exceptions for his friends. This hypocrisy was like poison. Young members of his family saw New York mobsters getting rich from drugs in Philadelphia's territory, while they were stuck with old-fashioned businesses. The anger grew until it could not be held back anymore. The generation gap. Bruno was born in 1910, grew up during Prohibition, and formed his view of the world during the Depression and World War II. His values and methods were from a different time. The younger generation of mobsters grew up in the rich period after the war. They saw opportunities everywhere. They were less patient, less disciplined, and less respectful of the old ways to them. Bruno's carefulness looked like weakness. His way of talking things out looked like cowardice. The Atlantic City controversy, when Bruno declared Atlantic City open territory, it made sense from a smart point of view. It avoided a war, kept the peace, and shared the money. But to ambitious younger members, it looked like Bruno was giving away their inheritance to please New York. Atlantic City was in Philadelphia's territory. By traditional mafia rules, it belonged to them. The fact that Bruno willingly shared it, even though doing so stopped bloodshed, was seen as giving up. It was seen as weakness. Proof that the old man had lost his touch. The perception of weakness in the mafia. How things look matters as much as how they really are. Bruno's kindness toward Antonio Polina, which had earned him the Gentle Don nickname, was at first seen as wisdom. But as years went by and younger members grew angry, that same kindness was seen as softness. The truth is that Bruno was probably stronger and meaner than his reputation suggested. You do not rule the mob for 21 years by being weak, but the idea of him being gentle, along with his age and his old-fashioned way of doing things, created a picture that plotters could use. Tony Bananas' ambition. Antonio Caponegro was the match that lit the fire. His personal ambition, his anger with Bruno's rules, and his terrible mistake in judging the commission's reaction created the situation for murder. Without Caponegro actively plotting, Bruno might have retired peacefully, died of natural causes, and been replaced by someone who continued his ways. But Caponegro's plot and his recruitment of John Stanfa made the killing possible. Bruno's plan failed because it needed one specific person, Angelo Bruno himself, to make it work. His personal friendships, his reputation, his smart thinking, his political friends, these were things that could not be passed on. When he died, his system died with him. Nicky Scarfo tried to rule through fear and violence. The opposite of Bruno's way, and within 10 years, the organization was destroyed. This suggests that maybe Bruno's way was the only way that worked at that time and in that place. History is full of what-if questions, and Angelo Bruno's story has several interesting ones. Let's look at other possible situations and how things might have been different. What if Bruno had retired? Imagine if Bruno, seeing the changing situation in the late 1970s, had decided to step down on his own. He was almost 70 years old. He had ruled successfully for 2 decades. He had legal businesses that could support him in retirement. He could have gone to the commission, announced his retirement, and suggested someone to take his place. Would they have let him retire in peace maybe? Some mob bosses have retired and lived out their days without being bothered. Carlo Gambino died of natural causes in 1976. That's a rare ending for a mob boss. But retiring is risky. You know too much. You are weak. And if the organization starts to fail under new leadership, there is always the risk that groups might try to bring you back, making you a threat to the new boss. Still, retiring would have been safer than what happened. Bruno would have lived longer, maybe died in his sleep, surrounded by family. Instead of being murdered in his car, Sue would not have spent her last years as a widow. The Philadelphia mob might have had a smoother change to new leadership. What if Bruno had embraced drug trafficking? Suppose Bruno had given up his public stance against drugs and allowed his family to fully take part in selling narcotics. The money would have been huge. His soldiers would have been happier, making fortunes like other families. The anger that led to his murder might never have happened. But drug selling brought strong federal attention. The FBI might have successfully put Bruno in jail if he had been directly involved in narcotics. He might have spent his last years in federal prison instead of ruling his organization, and the cost to society, to the lives destroyed by heroin, would have been huge. This might have been a choice between 2 bad options. Either stick to his principles and face a rebellion from within, or give up his principles and face the federal government. What if Bruno had been more aggressive with Atlantic City? Imagine if Bruno had claimed Atlantic City only for Philadelphia, fought off New York's attempts to move in, and controlled the casino businesses directly. His family would have made billions over the next few decades. They would be one of the richest criminal organizations in America. But New York would not have accepted this peacefully. The 5 families had more soldiers, more money, and more political friends than Philadelphia. A war over Atlantic City would have been terrible. Bodies would have piled up, federal investigations would have started, and Bruno might have died years earlier than he actually did. His decision to share Atlantic City probably saved his life for a short time. The irony is that this same decision created the anger that eventually killed him. What if John Stanfa had remained loyal? This is the most direct what if. What if John Stanfa, Bruno's trusted driver, had not betrayed him? What if Stanfa had warned Bruno about the plan to kill him? Bruno would have survived March 21st, 1980. He would have gotten rid of the plotters, including Tony Bananas. He might have ruled for a few more years, maybe into the mid-80s. But the problems underneath, the drug money issue, the conflict between generations, the anger over Atlantic City would have still been there. Another plot might have formed, or Bruno might have died of natural causes, causing the same problem of who would take over. Stanfa's betrayal was the thing that caused the death, but not necessarily the reason for it. The reason was deeper. structural problems in the organization that probably could not be solved peacefully. These what-if situations show something important. Bruno was trapped by situations that were partly out of his control. The drug money was too good to ignore. The change in generations was going to happen. The Atlantic City situation had no perfect solution. His murder might have been preventable for a short time, but the forces leading to violence in the organization were probably unstoppable. We have spent more than an hour talking about Angelo Bruno, the mob boss, the criminal planner, the gentle Don. But what about Angelo Bruno? The man, the husband, the father, the neighbor, the human being from all reports. Bruno was very dedicated to his wife, Sue. They married in 1931 and stayed together for 49 years until he died. In a world where mob bosses often had girlfriends, had affairs, and treated marriage as just something convenient, Bruno's faithfulness was special. Sue Bruno, from all reports, knew about her husband's criminal activities. She was not clueless, but she stayed, raised their children, and kept a home life that was as normal as possible under the circumstances. After Angelo's death, she lived for another 27 years, dying in 2007 at the age of 94. She never got married again, never gave interviews, and never wrote a book about her life. She kept her dignity and privacy until the end. Bruno's children, Michael and Jean, stayed away from the mob life. This itself is important to note. Many sons of mob bosses followed their fathers into crime. It was expected, almost required. But Bruno apparently kept his children separate from his business. They were not trained to take over. They were not brought to meetings. They were not introduced to that world after Bruno's death. Michael and Zhang lived quiet lives. They did not make money from their father's fame. They did not write books or give interviews. They protected their privacy and tried to live normal lives, even though their father was infamous. People who lived on Bruno's street in South Philadelphia described him as quiet, respectful, and polite. He would say hello when passing by. He would shovel snow, not just from his own sidewalk, but from the sidewalks of elderly neighbors as well. He would give big tips at local restaurants. He went to church regularly. Did they know he was a mob boss? Probably. South Philadelphia was a close community where people knew each other's business. But there is a rule in neighborhoods like that. You do not talk about certain things. You do not ask certain questions. As long as Bruno was not bringing violence to their streets, as long as he was respectful, they could live together. This is part of the complicated relationship between city neighborhoods of a certain ethnicity and organized crime. The mob was harmful, criminal, and took from others. But individual mobsters could also be neighbors, friends, and familiar faces who seemed like normal people most of the time. Bruno gave to local charities, though we should be clear about what this means. He was not a philanthropist in any real way. His charity was a smart move, meant to build good feelings and make him look legitimate. But the money still helped people. Churches got donations. Community centers were supported. Local sports teams got uniforms. This is part of the moral puzzle of people like Bruno. He was a criminal who ran an organization that hurt people through money lending, gambling addiction, and fear. But he was also a person who did kind things, had real friendships, and lived much of his life in ways you could not tell apart from regular citizens. Can someone be both a mob boss and a good neighbor? Both a criminal and a devoted husband? Both a racketeer and a generous tipper? Bruno's life suggests yes, human beings are complicated, able to have conflicting qualities at the same time. This brings us to a basic question that we have talked around for hours, but need to face directly. Can a mobster be gentle? The nickname the Gentle Don suggests a kind of good-hearted criminal, a mob boss who was not as bad as the others, who chose peace over violence and mercy over revenge. And there is some truth to this description. Bruno did avoid unneeded violence. He did let enemies live. He did keep relative peace for 2 decades. But let's be absolutely clear about what Bruno was. He was a criminal. He ran an organization that forced businesses to pay money, loaned money at illegal interest rates that trapped people in debt. He ran illegal gambling that destroyed families, controlled workers' unions through fear. And yes, even though he said he was against it, he made money from selling drugs. People suffered under Angelo Bruno's rule. Businesses paid protection money they could not afford. Gambling addicts lost everything to Bruno's betting businesses. Union members were taken advantage of. Anyone who seriously challenged Bruno's power was dealt with. Maybe not as violently as other bosses would have done, but they were dealt with all the same. So, what do we think of the gentle label? Maybe it is in comparison. Compared to Nicky Scarfo's rule of terror, compared to the violence that took over Philadelphia after Bruno's death, compared to the typical mob boss of his time. Yes, Bruno was gentler, the number of dead bodies was lower. The peace was real, the stability was genuine. Bruno proved that organized crime could be done with less violence than is usually linked with the mafia. He showed that smart thinking and careful planning could be more effective than fear and murder. He showed that in the criminal world, just like in the legal world, smarts often win over pure strength, but less violent does not mean not violent. More strategic does not mean morally okay. Bruno was a criminal who made millions from illegal activities that harmed his community. His methods may have been more advanced than others of his time, but his job was still at its core about taking from and harming others. The truth is probably this: Angelo Bruno was a very smart, strategically brilliant criminal who understood that peace made more money than war. He was not gentle because he was a good person. He was gentle for practical reasons. His mercy toward Antonio Polino was not kindness. It was a smart move to build a reputation that would help him for years. This does not make him a complete evil person, but it does not make him a hero either. He is in that complicated middle area where most humans actually live. He was not purely good or purely evil, but a mix of qualities and choices that are hard to simply label. So what is Angelo Bruno's legacy? How should we remember him? What lessons, if any, does his life offer? For the police, Bruno represents both a success and a failure. The FBI and other agencies saw him as a major threat and spent a lot of time and money investigating him. And yet, he died without ever spending a long time in prison. He outsmarted them for many years, but his death caused the collapse of his organization, which law enforcement then completely destroyed within 20 years. The lesson might be patience. Bruno's careful way made him hard to catch, but it also created tensions inside his organization that eventually destroyed it from within. Sometimes the best plan is to wait for criminals to defeat themselves. For organized crime, Bruno's legacy in the criminal world is mixed. His methods proved that peace could make money, that smart thinking could make more money than violence, that careful planning could keep you out of prison. These lessons were not missed by other mobsters. But his murder also proved that in the mafia, being new is dangerous. The old rules of violence, revenge, and manly shows of power are very deep-rooted. A boss who strays too far from tradition, even if he is successful, becomes weak to traditionalists who see new ways as weakness. The violence in Philadelphia after Bruno served as a warning to other bosses. Keep the old ways or risk a rebellion from within. For his community, Bruno's legacy in South Philadelphia is complicated. During his rule, the neighborhood was pretty peaceful. Mob violence was very little. Businesses worked without constant fear. Kids could play in the streets safely. After his death, violence exploded. The neighborhood became dangerous. The Italian-American community's complicated relationship with the mob, which was a mix of putting up with it and being afraid of it, turned into rejection by the 1990s. South Philadelphia wanted nothing to do with organized crime, Did Bruno protect his community? Or did he just use it more carefully than the ones who came after him? Probably both. For history, Angelo Bruno represents a specific time in American history. It was a time when organized crime was changing from old, neighborhood-based ethnic groups to more spread-out, violent, drug-focused crime. Bruno was one of the last of the old-school bosses. He was trained in traditional La Cosa Nostra values and believed in the commission system and a top-down structure. After him came a new generation that was less tied to tradition, more willing to break rules, and more focused on quick money than long-term stability. His story is the story of that change and the violence that is part of such changes. Perhaps Bruno's most important legacy is simply this: he proved that there is more than one way to be a criminal. The loud, violent, attention-seeking mobster is one type, but the quiet, strategic, peacekeeping mobster can be just as successful, and maybe even more so. The fact that his way of doing things did not last after his death does not make it wrong. It just means that in the criminal world, like in the legal world, systems that last require more than one brilliant person. They require group structures, shared values, and the ability to change, which Bruno's organization in the end did not have. What happened to the people in Angelo Bruno's story? Where did they end up? Let's look at what happened to the key people. Sue Bruno, after Angelo's murder, she lived for another 27 years in that same South Philadelphia row house. She died in 2007 at age 94. Having lived more than 25 years longer than her husband. She never got married again, never gave interviews, and kept her privacy and dignity until the end. She is buried next to Angelo at Holy Cross Cemetery, Michael and Jane Bruno. Angelo's children both stayed away from organized crime, living quiet lives away from the public. They protected their privacy, said no to requests for interviews, and tried to live as normally as possible, even though their father was famous. Both are now old, and what they are doing now is kept private on purpose. John Stanfa, the man who betrayed Bruno, had an interesting path. After the murder, he first avoided being charged, successfully playing the victim, but in the early 1990s, after many other bosses had been put in prison, Stanfa actually became the boss of the Philadelphia family himself. His time as boss was a disaster. He started another mob war, was completely bad at his job, and was found guilty of racketeering and murder charges in 1996. He was sentenced to life in federal prison, where he is still today, now in his 80s. The man who betrayed Angelo Bruno for power ended up dying in prison anyway. The Philadelphia crime family, by the early 2000s. The organization was a ghost of what it used to be. From hundreds of members during Bruno's time, it shrunk to maybe 24 active members. Federal court cases had destroyed the leadership. Informants had destroyed trust. The younger generation saw organized crime as old-fashioned and too risky. Today, the Philadelphia crime family technically still exists, but it works on a much smaller level. They do low-level gambling, some money lending, and small-time labor crimes. The days of controlling big businesses and making millions are long gone. The police still watch them, but they are no longer seen as a big threat. Atlantic City. The casinos that Bruno shared, instead of fighting over, are now mostly owned by big companies. The mob's influence that everyone was afraid of in the 1970s and 80s was mostly kept out by strong rules and police work. Ironically, Bruno's decision to declare it open territory may have stopped organized crime from ever really controlling Atlantic City. The extra tension made mob business too risky. The city itself had good times in the 1980s and 90s, then went down again as more states made gambling legal. Today, it is struggling with its economy, with several big casinos closed. The billions of dollars everyone expected never really showed up as predicted. South Philadelphia, the neighborhood has changed a lot. The Italian-American community that was dominant for many years has been replaced by younger, more diverse people. Property values have gone up as Philadelphia has become more modern. The social clubs and restaurants where mobsters once held their meetings are mostly gone, replaced by cool bars and coffee shops. The row house where Angelo Bruno was murdered still stands at 934 Snyder Avenue. It is a private home. And sometimes it attracts tourists who are interested in true crime and want to see where the gentle Don died. But mostly, it is just a house, just like dozens of others on the block. Its famous history is fading into the past, the world that Angelo Bruno lived in. With its close-knit ethnic neighborhoods, powerful workers' unions, widespread political corruption, and organized crime families controlling big businesses, has mostly disappeared. Some of this is good progress. With less corruption, less organized crime, and safer communities, but something was also lost. A sense of neighborhood closeness, ethnic identity, and local community structure that, with all its problems, gave people a feeling of belonging. The mob was destructive and criminal, but the social structures around it, like the community groups, the ethnic clubs, and the neighborhood togetherness, had value. Angelo Bruno's story is partly the story of that world passing away. To fully understand how important Angelo Bruno was, we need to put him in the larger story of how American organized crime changed from the 1920s to today. The Prohibition era, 1920 to 1933. This is when modern American organized crime was born. The 18th Amendment created a huge illegal market that existing criminal groups quickly grew to fill. Italian-American gangs, Irish mobs, and Jewish groups all became extremely rich and powerful by selling illegal alcohol. This time established organized crime as a lasting part of American society. The money made during Prohibition allowed criminals to buy political protection, legal businesses, and social respectability that lasted long after alcohol was legal again. Angelo Bruno grew up during this time, learning the basics of organized crime when he was a teenager and a young man, the Commission era. 1931 to the 1980s. In 1931, Lucky Luciano started the Commission as a way to solve fights between mafia families and stop destructive wars. This brought structure and stability to organized crime for many years. The commission model worked because powerful bosses knew that working together made more money than constant fighting. Bruno's whole career was within this commission structure. His success was partly because he understood how to work within this system. The Golden Age, 1940s to 1970s. These decades were the peak of organized crime's influence in American society. Mob families controlled major workers' unions, had a say in politics at local and national levels, ran legal and illegal businesses that made billions, and kept a kind of separate power structure in major cities. Bruno's 21-year rule is entirely within this golden age. He was one of the most successful bosses of the time, exactly because he understood how to do well in this environment. The RICO era, 1970s to the present. The Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, passed in 1970, gave police powerful tools to attack whole criminal organizations instead of just single crimes, combined with witness protection programs, electronic listening devices, and other modern police methods. RICO destroyed traditional organized crime. Bruno mostly avoided serious RICO charges during his life, but the people who came after him were destroyed by it. The collapse of the Philadelphia family in the 1980s and 90s was partly because of RICO cases that put whole leadership groups in prison. The modern era, 1990s to the present, today. Traditional Italian-American organized crime families still exist, but they operate on a much smaller scale. They have been replaced as major criminal threats by drug cartels, international trafficking groups, cybercriminals, and other modern criminal businesses. The world of neighborhood-based ethnic mob families that Bruno lived in has largely disappeared. It has been replaced by more spread-out international and technology-driven criminal networks that would be unrecognizable to traditional mobsters. Angelo Bruno's story is the story of organized crime at its peak and the beginning of its fall. He represented the last generation of traditional mob bosses who worked by old-world rules and commission structures. His murder in 1980 was a turning point. After him came violence, chaos, and finally the destruction of the traditional mafia model in this way. Bruno's death was not just a personal tragedy or a disruption to his group. It was a symbol of bigger changes in American criminal culture, police abilities, and social structures that were making the traditional mafia outdated. Angelo Bruno never tried to be famous. He stayed away from the media, said no to interviews, and lived a simple life, and yet, his story has become a part of American cultural tales about organized crime. Why? The Godfather connection. Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather movies, which came out in 1972 and 1974, created a romantic picture of mafia dons. They were shown as complex, smart, and even honorable people who lived by old rules. Don Vito Corleone, who was fictional but loosely based on different real mobsters, is the perfect example of this. Angelo Bruno, with his smart thinking, his mercy toward enemies, and his long peaceful rule, fits this Godfather type perfectly. He seems like a real-life version of the fictional Don. This makes his story especially interesting to people who are already prepared by pop culture to find mob bosses fascinating. The nickname, the Gentle Don, is just too perfect. It is a paradox because gentle and Don seem to be opposites, and that makes it memorable. The nickname suggests he was complex and different, a criminal who was not like the stereotypes. It is the kind of detail that storytellers love, because it immediately makes you curious. The dramatic arc. Bruno's life has a perfect story structure. He started with humble beginnings as an immigrant. He rose to power through smarts rather than violence. He had 2 decades of success. He was betrayed by people he trusted. He had a violent death. There was immediate revenge against the plotters. Then there were 2 decades of chaos that proved his methods worked. It is almost too perfect. It reads like a made-up story. Even though it is all factually recorded, the what could have been factor. Bruno's murder feels like it could have been stopped in ways that make it especially sad. If John Stanfa had been loyal, if Bruno had changed his drug policy, if he had retired a few years earlier, the feeling that his death could have been avoided makes it more emotional than the mob deaths that were bound to happen. The contrast of the spectacular violence that followed, the incredible violence that came after Bruno's death, makes his peaceful rule look even more impressive in comparison. The 30-plus murders, the mob wars, and the collapse of the organization all prove that Bruno's approach worked. His legacy is made better by the failures of those who came after him. Bruno has appeared in documentaries, movies, television shows, books, podcasts, and countless articles. His story is taught in criminology classes as a case study in how to manage a group. His methods are studied in business schools as examples of smart thinking. His life has become a cultural reference point for talks about crime punishment and the complicated relationship between American society and organized crime. For someone who tried so hard to stay out of the spotlight during his life, Angelo Bruno has achieved a kind of immortality through storytelling after his death. We have spent hours together looking into the life and death of Angelo Bruno. We have followed his journey from a Sicilian immigrant boy to one of the most powerful mob bosses in America. We have studied his methods, looked at his contradictions, and seen the terrible violence his death caused. So who was Angelo Bruno? He was a criminal who hurt people through his illegal businesses. He was a strategic genius who proved that smarts could win over violence. He was a hypocrite who made money from drugs while publicly banning them. He was a devoted husband who stayed married for 49 years. He was a gentle Don who showed mercy to his enemies. He was a mob boss who killed when he had to, despite his peaceful reputation. He was all of these things at the same time, a complicated human being working in a complicated moral world. On March 21, 1980, there was a shotgun blast in South Philadelphia. One life ended, 21 years of peace died with him. The violence that followed, with over 30 murders in 2 decades, proved after the fact that Bruno's methods worked. His peaceful way kept his family profitable and alive. His successor's violent way destroyed the organization completely. There's a lesson here about violence. It is tempting, it feels powerful, it seems like the solution. But violence tends to spiral, create cycles of revenge, attract the police, and in the end, destroy the very things it is meant to protect. Bruno understood this, his killers did not. And Philadelphia's criminal world paid the price. Angelo Bruno ruled for 21 years. During that time, he made millions, avoided long prison sentences, kept relative peace, and kept his family wealthy. He lived to be 69 years old, which is longer than most mob bosses. He died at home in his neighborhood rather than in prison or in another country. By the standards of his profession, he was extremely successful. By the standards of law-abiding society, he was a criminal who caused harm and deserved punishment that he mostly avoided. Both things are true. History rarely gives us simple heroes or villains. Just people making choices in complex situations, leaving behind complicated legacies that are hard to simply label. Today, South Philadelphia has largely moved on from its mob history. The younger generation knows the stories. Everyone in the neighborhood knows about Angelo Bruno. But organized crime is not part of daily life anymore. The social clubs are gone. The connected guys are mostly dead or in prison. The old ways have faded away. Bruno's row house still stands. It's a quiet reminder of a time when one man's intelligence kept an entire criminal organization at peace for 2 decades. His grave at Holy Cross Cemetery sometimes gets visitors. They are true crime fans, history lovers, and people fascinated by his story. Sue Bruno's grave is right next to his. They are together again, just as they were for 49 years of marriage. Whatever Angelo was to the world, a mob boss, a criminal planner to Sue, he was a husband. And she stayed loyal even after death, never marrying again. And waiting 27 years to join him. Maybe that is the most human detail in this whole story. Despite everything else, Angelo Bruno was loved. Every historical story leaves questions that are not answered, mysteries that will probably never be solved. Angelo Bruno's life is no different. Did Bruno know about the plot? Some researchers have suggested that Bruno might have known about the plan against him. He might have suspected John Stanfa or Tony Bananas, but chose not to do anything. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he thought he could handle it. Maybe he made a mistake. We will never know if he died completely unaware, or if some part of him felt what was coming. How much money did he really have? Bruno lived simply. But that does not mean he was not rich. It is very hard to track money from crime. He probably had money hidden in legal businesses, in accounts in other countries, and in investments under other people's names. The real amount of his fortune is still unknown. His family certainly did not show off their inheritance. What was his part in Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance? We have talked about the theories, but the truth is still hard to find. Did Bruno know about the killing before it happened? Did he approve it? Did he provide help? Or was he kept out of the loop, unless new evidence shows up? We will probably never know for sure. Could the violence have been prevented? This is maybe the most haunting question. Was the bloodbath going to happen no matter what once Bruno was killed? Or could better leadership have brought back peace? If the commission had picked a different successor, if Nicky Scarfo had been skipped over, would Philadelphia have become stable? Or were the forces of generational change and drug money too powerful to stop? What did Bruno really think about his life? We have no interviews, no book from him, and no confessions on his deathbed. We do not know if Bruno felt proud of what he did, guilty about his crimes, conflicted about his double life, or completely comfortable with his choices. His inner life is a secret. We can study his actions, but not his thoughts. These unanswered questions are part of why Angelo Bruno's story is still fascinating many years after his death. There is enough written proof to know the facts, but enough mystery to keep people guessing in some ways. The questions are more interesting than final answers would be. History is not neat. Real life does not give you closure the way stories do. Angelo Bruno lived, ruled, died, and left behind a complicated legacy that continues to be debated and studied. That is perhaps a good ending for a man who spent his life avoiding simple labels. And so ends the story of Angelo Bruno, a man who proved that in the violent world of organized crime, sometimes the quietest voice could be the most powerful. For 21 years he ruled not with fear, but with smarts, not with bloodshed, but with business sense. And when he was finally shot down on that March night in 1980, the peace he had built fell apart in weeks. His legacy is still complicated. Was he a gentle don, or just a smart criminal, a man of honor? Or a hypocrite who secretly made money from the very drugs he publicly banned? History may never fully answer these questions, but one thing is for sure. The Philadelphia criminal world has never seen anyone like him again. If you made it this far, you are a true crime history fan. And I thank you for staying with me through this whole journey. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think of Angelo Bruno? Was his peaceful way something to admire? Or was he just as mean as any other mob boss? Could his killing have been avoided, or was it bound to happen? Put your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love talking about these stories with you. If this deep look into mob history interested you, do me a favor. Hit that like button so more people can find these forgotten stories. Subscribe if you have not already. We have more gangster documentaries coming. Turn on notifications so you never miss when we post the next episode. Share this video with anyone who is fascinated by true crime and American history. These stories matter. They are a part of American history. Whether we like it or not, understanding the past, even its darkest parts, helps us make sense of today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, in the world Angelo Bruno lived in, peace was the most dangerous weapon of all.